The ANA eLearning Academy is brought to you by CDN Graysheet, a trusted source of rare coin and currency valuations since 1963.
Hello, everyone on the e-learning class this evening. Thank you for joining us today and for participating in the ANA eLearning Academy. The ANA would like to thank our e-learning partner, Graysheet, for their support of the e-learning program. Today, we've got Joe Bowling, who will be presenting on 19th century U.S. national banknote counterfeits. The second part of the class is going to be counterfeits of the Chinese paper money coming in from China. So we're going to kind of take a 5-minute break in between. And before that 5-minute break, we will do a Q&A regarding the 19th century U.S. national banknotes. So everyone will be muted for this presentation. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A box, and I will read them to Joe at the end of section 1 and section 2. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Joe.
Okay, my name is Joseph Bowling. I'm a 47-year member of the ANA, a 51-year member of the International Banknote Society, and a 56-year collector of paper money of all stripes. I'm going to turn my video off and drop the cover on my laptop down so I can watch the monitor as I'm going through here, because I much prefer the image on the monitor. Okay, counterfeit 19th century national banknotes. Well, it didn't advance. There we go. Here we have two notes. The one on top is genuine, the one on the bottom is a counterfeit. And let's look at them and see if we can find some differences between them. Counterfeits typically circulated until they fell apart, because once they got known to be bad notes, nobody would go near them with a bank, or go near a bank with them to try to exchange them for something good, because they knew they'd lose it. So they would just keep passing it on. And you can see that this piece here has actually had its corner torn off and reattached. So that's not atypical of counterfeits, that that a corner was torn off to indicate that it was a bad note. Now, first thing we might notice is that this one is signed by Chittenden and Spinner. And this one is signed by Colby and Spinner. So there's a difference that might be telling. Let's check the dates. May 2nd, 1864. May 2nd, 1864. Those stayed the same. But look at this. Act approved June 3rd, 1864. How can you have a bank charter date before the approval of the act that authorized the bank? So if we go back up here to this other one, it says act approved, and you can't read it here, but it says February 25th, 1863. Well, that's consistent with the May 1864 charter date. So this is an example of what was going on with counterfeits in this period. As soon as the bank's notes were identified as being counterfeit and were published in the counterfeit detectors, the commercial periodicals that described counterfeits in circulation, the counterfeiters would change the plate to read a different bank. So this actually started out, the plate for this note started out with some bank for which Colby and Spinner were legitimate signatories. But after that bank became known, and I don't know which bank it was, they changed it to the First of Northampton. Now, they might not have changed this at all, because it might have been First of something else. It might have been First of Southampton. Who knows? All you have to do is change the city name and nothing else. and then it's no longer a published counterfeit, and it circulates until it gets to be known and it gets to be published, and then you change the plate again. Although these are engraved notes, they're highly skilled craftsmen that were making these counterfeits. You still had the capability, if the plate had not been hardened, to hammer out a portion of it and re-engrave it and show a different city name or a different town, different bank name. So some of these plates went through successive generations, and we're going to see one shortly from which I have 6 different banks counterfeits, all made from that one plate. Now this is an example of one of the counterfeit detectors of the period. This is dated 1879. Here we have the 2 that we just looked at from Northampton. You see the corner torn off here. This is intaglio. This one's intaglio. This one over here is lithographed. And you can see the difference in the quality of the images. This is supposed to be Columbus introducing America in the form of an Indian maiden to the 3 other major parts of the world, Africa, Asia, and Europe. And this is the fellow representing Africa back here in the shadows. Well, on the original plate, he's fairly visible. On the other engraved plate, engraved by somebody not involved with the original production, he's a little less visible. And on the lithograph plate, he just fades away into nothing. This is partly because lithograph notes didn't wear well. Here's an example of a lithograph note, and you can see that it's almost completely obliterated in circulation. Another example of a note that circulated until literally it was falling apart. Another technology is letterpress. This is a letterpress note, a brown back, a little bit later than the other 3 we've been looking at up to now. I don't have a genuine of this Iron Bank of Morristown. I've been looking for one for 10 or 15 years, and I've never had an opportunity to buy one. So I'm using a different brown back of approximately the same condition to show the difference in the quality between the original notes and a letterpress note. And you can see that as good as this might look as a one-off, just a single note in your hand, when you lay it down next to a genuine piece, even one in low condition, low grade, it's easily distinguishable. This is one reason why I use counterfeit pairs in my teaching at summer seminar, so a student can see a good note and a bad note in the same condition and recognize that even in schlocky condition you can still separate the notes. Here's yet another way of making a counterfeit. This one is completely hand-drawn. This is a pen and ink rendition of the Thames National Bank $10 note of the original series. If we get close to this, first off, all of these silk threads are painted on. The serial number, the seal, is all hand-drawn. You can see that this woman over here is all hand-drawn. All of this scroll work is hand-drawn. This is not an Emmanuel Ninger piece. Ninger, the penman, he did this kind of work too, but he didn't put the Bureau of Engraving and Printing imprint on his notes. He said, I don't want them taking credit for my work, and I won't take credit for their work. So he always left the imprint off. So this is some other freelance artist's rendition of a national banknote. Now when you flip it over, the color on the back is wrong because over time the ink has changed from the brownish hue, a dull brown, to this fairly bright red. There's an original of the same note, Thames National Bank, $10, a genuine piece. These are both series of 18, what's it say there, 89? It should be 1882. Yeah, it looks like 82 here. You can see that, again, side by side, they're easy to tell apart. But if you're handed this one in a purchase price of, say, $70, and it's just one of the notes in the stack, and people are just, thumbing through the stack to count the money, it's likely to get through without any difficulty. Now, there's the original color, also faded out due to age, and you can see that the counter in the middle, it's not a counter, it's a charter number, also changed colors. So, as bad as this note might look today in terms of comparing it to a genuine, when it was new, it probably was a much better comparison. Now, here's another form of counterfeit detector. The first one I showed you is one of those that actually describes bad notes bank by bank. Heath had a different approach. Heath had permission to use portions of genuine note plates. This is a genuine $50 national portion of the plate that the Treasury allowed the Bureau to print for him, and then he would bind them into these books, and there would always be canceled like this, and not all there. They should have allowed him only to do one end of the note consistently, but over several editions he was able to use both ends of the plates, so that if you buy more than one of his books and you match them up properly, you can get most of the entire note. Now, what it doesn't have is the business identifying the bank for which this note was going to be printed. Now, you notice it says American Banknote Company. Well, originally, these nationals were all printed by contract printers, American, National, and Continental. It wasn't until 1875 that the Bureau took all those contracts in-house and put a lot of plate printers and engravers out of work, the people who'd been working for these private contractors. So they, being highly skilled, took up counterfeiting. And that's why we have intaglio counterfeits of the period. This is the one we looked at before, Dye. He was in the 1870s. Underwood's was in the 1880s. Dickerman's was in the 1890s. This is 1894. National carried into the 20th century and actually published up to the 1950s. In the small size note period, identifying individual counterfeits by plate number and position letter in their publication. Now let's take a look at some of the kind of information you would get. Going back that first pair we looked at for Northampton, it says the genuine notes are signed Chittenden, counterfeits are signed Colby. Well, that's what we saw in that pair in the first slide. The counterfeit was signed by Colby, and the counterfeit was signed by Chittenden. Other banks had other diagnostics, so they would write up each counterfeit as it became public, and describe, what the difference was between genuines and originals. It gives you the city, the bank name, and the position letter in the plate. These notes are all printed 4 on a plate, 4 on a sheet. If you had all the same denomination, 4 5s, then it would be A, B, C, D. But for instance, if it was a 10, 10, 10, 20, the 10s would be A, B, C, and the 20 would be A. And if you had to go to a second plate, if the first plate wore out, then the second plate would be DEF for the 10s and B, Bravo, for the 20. Here we have a Third National Bank of Philadelphia. This was the first bank that used this particular plate. The tell on this is very subtle. The signatures are fine, the date's fine, there's nothing obvious wrong with it. But way up here in this corner, there's a little bit here that says national currency, where somebody has torn the note intentionally to try to hide the defect. It says national currency. The C was left out over here. So that's the diagnostic for the Third of Philadelphia. Well, when the Third of Philadelphia became known, it was changed to the First of Philadelphia. The diagnostic up here is still the same, but the easy part is that the date is incorrect. That's still the date for the Third of Philadelphia. So as published in the Counterfeit detectors, the Counterfeit detector says that the genuine notes have a different date on them than the one that's shown here. They always use the easiest naked eye diagnostic to describe a bad note by. And the problem back here on the third was there was no easy naked eye diagnostic. You had only this little tiny defect up in one corner of the note. Now we're going to start with this plate. I said I had 6 counterfeits from this plate. Another thing that Heath had permission to do, in addition to printing portions of genuine plates, is he had permission to print entire plates of counterfeits that had been seized by the Secret Service. Or this is actually, I'm not sure if the Secret Service is already in business chasing counterfeiters at this time. Yeah, they were. That was their original job. They didn't start protecting the president until later. So the Secret Service or somebody from the Treasury had seized this plate from a counterfeiting group and had it in custody, and he was allowed to print from it. And you can see that this plate was in process of being converted to first from something else. We don't know what was originally here. You can see little bits and pieces of it still remain. And when they hammered it out, they damaged the York, they damaged the curlicue on July here. So, and they damaged some of this line across here. But this is going to be the first national, or could be the first Colombian national bank of the city of New York or something. We don't know what first it was going to be. With a date of July 19th, 1865. Well, notice this tablet down here that says the city of New York. Here we have 2 notes made from that plate. Oh, let me go back and show you the diagnostics we're going to be looking at here. Down here in this vignette, this wounded soldier, on his trousers, we have these vertical shading lines. Those do not appear on genuine notes. There are shading lines in that location, but they're not vertical and they're not parallel like this. So that's what we're going to be looking for on all of the counterfeits that came off of this plate. So here we have Market National Bank of New York, different tablet. But here are the vertical shading lines. We move down here, there they are again. Now both of these have the same tablet. You can see that they don't have the same date. Those others were July. These are January 19th. It was July 19th on that final plate. On these earlier versions of it, it was January 19th. Jan with a small y up here. So here we have the Market National Bank of New York, and a little bit of overlap with the curlicue right here. Down here, just the National with the curlicue complete, so that may have preceded the one above it. Now we get to where they've changed the tablet to say the city of New York. And here's merchants, and now we're in July 19th, 1865. And you can see where this gets close to the York over here, and it overlaps the curlicue here. And down here, the curlicue is still complete, and the York is pretty complete. And they both show the vertical shading lines on the trousers of the wounded soldier. I was originally going to use the funny looking the face on this nurse, but I discovered later that on genuine notes she looks just as hideous on the genuine notes. So frequently portraits on counterfeits are not nearly as well done as on genuine pieces, and you can use portraits as a good way to separate them. Now we go to another pair. The Tradesmen's National Bank of New York. And this is completely obliterated the month. We can't tell what month was supposed to have been here. It's still 19th of 1865, but something has happened to the month there. And now we went out of town. Go to a completely different bank in a different town, but it's still got the same tell on the wounded soldier. So here we have 6 notes, all showing exactly that same distinct treatment of that part of the vignette. Here are all the 6 of them together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They're all the B position. Second note down on the plate. Here's what a genuine one looks like. You can see the shading lines here are parallel, but they're diagonal. They're not vertical. Now this is not a New York note. I don't remember what note I used here for the original. And it's not an original series note. It's a series of 1882 note, which used the same basic plate. And this one doesn't have the Bureau imprint on it. When the Bureau took these plates in, if they had to change the plate for any reason, they added their imprint, printed at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. If they didn't have to change the plate for any reason, then they didn't bother. They continued using it with the original contractor's identification. All right, here's another example of multiple banks, same plate. Kinderhook, New York. I never thought I'd be able to get a genuine lazy deuce to match one of my counterfeit lazy deuces. I've got several counterfeit lazy deuces, but by golly, eventually, if you wait long enough, it'll show up. A Stax auction had this National Kinderhook. Now, the illustration in their catalog was not in sufficient detail to see the diagnostic, so I had to ask them for good scans of it and confirm that in fact it was genuine and you could identify the diagnostic. The diagnostic is down here in this will pay, the word will. And the genuine note, the flourish at the beginning of the W just goes this far. And the counterfeit, it makes almost a full circle, a full oval. That's one of the tells. The other is up here at this plate letter A, where you've got one flourish below on the genuine note and two flourishes below on the counterfeit. Now this is not a consistent application across all genuine notes. Some genuine notes have the two flourishes. So you can't use number of flourishes to look at a note and say, oh, well, that's got to be a counterfeit because it matches the known counterfeit from Kinderhook. In the Heath counterfeit detector, you'll see that the genuine plate that he used to illustrate the left end of a lazy deuce has two flourishes on it. So, but the business with the flourish on the W of will is consistent. Here's the Heath counterfeit detector, and you can see it's got the two flourishes here. We don't have the right hand end of this note to look at. All right, this is the Kinderhook we just looked at, the counterfeit from National Union Bank. And here's the Marine National Bank. And it's got the same big sweeping oval here of New York. Now this number over here is a treasury number. It never repeats. These numbers up here are bank serial numbers. And they go from 1 up to whatever number of sheets the bank received. Every note on the sheet got the same number, and the ABCD uniquely identified the specific note from that sheet. Well, let's check out those two treasury numbers. Same font, same number. Tell me these aren't genuine. Obviously from the same source. Here we have St. Nicholas National Bank. Same device over here. Westchester. Now we're in a different city. We're not in New York anymore. We're out in Peekskill. Same device here. And see how this one's been damaged and repaired. And what do we have here? The 9th National of New York. With the same device here, partially obliterated by this long tablet here. Well, they didn't use this as the diagnostic in the counterfeit detectors. They used the fact that it says 9th National Bank of City of New York. There's supposed to be a THE after of. It's supposed to say of the City of New York. The counterfeiters left the "the" off, and that became the diagnostic that got published in the counterfeit detectors. Changing states. Why do you only change the faceplate and not the backplate? Because all these nationals had state seals on the backs. And so if you were going to change a plate from the 3rd of Philadelphia to the 1st of Philadelphia, you didn't want to change it to the 3rd of something in Delaware because you'd have to put a different seal on the back, and that was more work. So you always change plates to another bank within the same state. And here we have the first pair that I was ever actually able to get of a genuine note here and a counterfeit note here. I try to collect these as pairs so the students can see the exact same note. Well, I almost passed up this genuine here because it didn't say Colby. This says Colby and Spinner, and the genuine I was offered said Chittenden and Spinner, and I almost didn't buy it. But I figured, well, it might be my only opportunity ever to get a genuine note on this bank, so I bought it. And when I showed it to Peter Huntoon, he chuckled and he says, well, you'd be waiting a long time to get a Canton with a Colby signature, because Colby was not in office yet when this note was dated. So there's no way that you're going to find a Colby signature on a National Bank of Canton in the original charter series. You notice I've said several times original charter. I haven't said first charter. First, second, third charter does describe in very crude terms a distinction between phases of the national banking period, but and it's complicated, which I'm not going to have time to explain here, but take one of Peter's courses sometime and you'll get no end of it. It's much better to identify them by original, 75, 82, 92, I'm sorry, 02, 1902, and 1929. Call them by the charter number, or the charter date, which appears on the notes. Now, there was no charter date for this series, so they go by the term original series. But after this, after the Bureau took the printing in-house and they put on them series of 1875, and then the series of 82 all have the series indicated, the series of 1902 all do, and the series of 1929 all do. So what do we have here for a tell? Well, obviously the fact that it says Colby down here and Chittenden up here is one. That's the obvious one, the most obvious. But there's another one which is unique to the Illinois fives. Every original series $5 counterfeit from the state of Illinois used the same back plate, and it has an error on it. Now, whether this means that there was only one counterfeiting gang doing all of these notes from Illinois, or they were sharing the plate among them, or they had duplicated the plate. I don't know the answers to how the why came to be, but the fact is that every $5 original series counterfeit has the same error on the back. Let's see if that's the next slide here. Not yet. All right, here's Traders of Chicago. There's First National of Paxton. They're all Illinois, and they all have the same back plate on them. Now, there may be other distinctions. I don't recall having looked these up to see what distinction is called out. Look at the condition of this piece. I mean, it really stayed in circulation a long time. Here we go. On the genuine note, this vertical line comes down and intersects one of the fives in the border. In the counterfeits, that vertical line comes down right between the fives. So anytime you're handed a $5 original series from Illinois, flip it over, look at the back, and see if it's got this diagnostic. If it does, it's not original. Here's an example I couldn't pass up. Look at the serial numbers here. This is the federal number, 77568, 77568. Obviously cannot be, well, it could be if these were A and B notes. If they were from the same sheet, they would have the same number. But if they're from the same position, they can't be repeated like this. And why would you make your number so conspicuous by tilting it like this? I mean, I just don't understand the rationale behind the counterfeiter who would not change the numbers, who would use the same number note after note, and then make it stand out in appearance by having it tilted like that. Tom Denley had both of these in stock at the same day, and I couldn't pass them by. I had to buy them because of this really peculiar pair here. Here's another example of chicanery with serial numbers. These are all from Indiana. The Lafayette National Bank, the Muncie National Bank, the Richmond National Bank. These are all counterfeited by the same gang of counterfeiters. They all use the same serial number on every note. Every note from all three of these banks that these counterfeiters printed has this same serial number. Now, that's really sort of dumb, because it's not hard for the newspapers to pick that up and publish it widely and say, if you get an Indiana National 10 that's got this serial number, don't accept it. Don't take it as payment for anything, because it's not going to be good. Now, as a matter of fact, there is one note with this serial number on one of these banks. Going into, and then, oh, there were the bank serial numbers as well, repeated. Going into the counterfeit detector, which shows the sheet number that the bank ordered and the federal number that was printed on each sheet, you can see that this number back here, 165167, was in fact delivered to Richmond. So that's a legitimate number. And if you take, if you figure that this number here is 1001, and you look back here and see what 1496, so we're going to add 496 to the starting number here, we get the number which is actually on the note. So the number on the Richmond note is a legitimate number for that bank, both by bank number and charter number, or treasury number. They match up. But Muncie and Lafayette never had those numbers. Now, there's one other really interesting thing about these. This 346, that's the bank charter number. Now, the fact that one of the notes doesn't have the charter numbers is not indication of any problem, because originally the notes did not have the charter numbers printed on them. Those were printed on later as a way to assist the people in Washington who were handling discarded notes, notes that have been removed from circulation because of their poor quality. Had to charge them off against the specific bank that had issued them, against their deposit to cover these notes. And so they printed large charter numbers to assist those clerks that were separating the notes by bank. But that 346 doesn't belong to any of these banks. It doesn't belong to Lafayette, Muncie, or Richmond. It belongs to a bank in Vevey, Indiana, which is way down in the southeast corner of the state. Why they selected that number to put on these notes is beyond me. You notice in the counterfeit detector here, it said that Richmond was bank number 2090. Started out as bank 1496. I'm sorry, that's the bad serial. It started out as bank 1102, and then was reorganized and rechartered under charter number 2090. And that's the number that should appear on the Richmond notes. Now, what's this one? The Lafayette National Bank. This is one of the Lafayette notes, which has had the first two letters removed and the last two letters removed so that it won't be found in a counterfeit detector. You know, somebody who got this note was suspicious of it and wanted to look it up in a counterfeit detector. They'd look for Lafayette, Indiana, and they wouldn't find it, because there was never a bank that issued notes in a city named Lafayette, or a town, or anything like that in Indiana. So there's another way that people who got caught with these notes tried to make them passable. Now, here's a really ugly looking note. Again, typical of counterfeits in circulation. They never got turned in for good money, good paper, because anybody who was suspicious of it would look it up and find that it was not legitimate. And there's the seal on the back that I was talking about, a state seal. There's always a state seal on one end and a federal seal on the other end. Now the counterfeit detector for this one talks about the scroll work up here in the upper left counter. That scroll work looks pretty damn decent. I don't see any issues with that, especially when you compare it with another note where it was over inked and the scroll work really looks ugly. Well, the way you determine this one then is don't look at the scroll work, look at the number. There's the chart for Auburn original series. Now we go back here, 394983. Never came near that bank. No number like that for Auburn, New York, Auburn City National Bank. So, unfortunately, these counterfeit detectors were only given these sets of numbers for original series notes. Starting with the series of 1875, Treasury didn't release those numbers. I don't know why, but the counterfeit detectors were not able to publish them. And not every issue of every counterfeit detector has one of these charts. This happens to be a Dickerman's from December 1894. Other Dickermans, in other months, other years, didn't have that data. You can find these counterfeit detectors being sold at auction by people like Colby and Fanning and Charlie Davis. If you're interested, if you're wanting a reference like this, I carry this Dickerman's with me at all times when I'm at a show. It's in my traveling bag. All right, here's Merchants of New Bedford. The diagnostic on this is part of the artwork. It's a very difficult diagnostic to really pin down. They're talking about the way Columbus's leg looks right here. They're calling this a clubbed leg. Well, it's a little chubby, that thigh. If you compare them with this one, it is a little fatter than this one down here. But if you don't have another $5 National readily at hand to compare with this, it's really going to be tough to look at that one and say that that's a bad note. I mean, look at the expression on this fellow's face here. That's really good work. These ones up here look a little bit more ugly, but they do on the genuine pieces too. Even the genuine notes didn't spend a lot of time on every portrait. But you can use the numbers, because there's the numbers that were issued to New Bedford. And we've got 302739. Nothing like that to that bank. Here's a quick and dirty way for separating some counterfeit lazy deuces. This is from the counterfeit detector. And we're going to look at these arrowheads on both ends of 2. These arrowheads on the genuine have deep knocks. The arrowheads on the counterfeits, that's an exception right there, is fairly deep. There's no knock at all here. That one's not nearly as deep as this one. That one's not nearly as deep as that one. This one hardly has any knock at all compared to that. And what's good about this is that these go all the way up the end of the note. So if part of this note is missing, find some part of the note that's still intact. And look at those arrowheads and see whether they're looking like that or looking like that. When is a charter number a serial number? Well, when a counterfeiter thinks the charter number is supposed to change on every note. There's the original charter number for the 1st of Tamaqua, 1219. This note has 837 on it. I have recorded 15 different charter numbers on counterfeits of the 1st of Tamaqua. It's a fairly common counterfeit, one of the most common counterfeits around. 15 different charter numbers. Now, he may have taken 1219 for one of them, so there might be a counterfeit that has the proper charter number on it out there someplace, probably long since retired and destroyed. But that's the tell that's used in a counterfeit detector. It says original notes must say 1219. Now, if you got a 1219, you want to check it further, you can flip it over and look at the other side. And up here in this legend, it talks about demands owing by the United States, O-W-I-N-G. If you look at that same spot down here, oops, O-W-N-I-G, ONIG. Well, that's the counterfeit. So if you ever run across a 1219 that says ONIG, you've got the one Tamaqua counterfeit that has the proper charter number on it. All others have fantasy charter numbers that belong to some other bank somewhere else in the country. Tradesmen of New York City. I almost passed this 50 up because I knew I'd never be able to get a genuine to match it. Because a genuine $50 national is a 4-figure note, maybe in the mid 4 figures, especially as nice as this one is. But I figured, well, as the only example of a 50 I'm ever going to own, I might as well have this counterfeit. So how do we separate this counterfeit? What are the tells on it? Well, there are a couple. One deals with the flourishes that are missing here, and the other deals with the vignette over here. But look at the good work on this. I mean, every face on the back of this note is well done. This is really excellent work for, even for a genuine note, let alone a counterfeit. Usually the back's got short shrift because very few people ever flip a note over and inspect the back very closely. But whoever was working on this, making this a counterfeit plate, was really a master. So here's the counterfeit detector. It shows the 2 flourishes here, which are missing on our counterfeit. And here's an example of, as I said, 2 different Heath counterfeit detectors. One has left ends and one has right ends. People at Treasury were not paying attention to what they were letting him use when he printed this counterfeit detector. Went through 12 or 13 editions. By the end of it, he was not able to print counterfeits anymore. He was only able to print portions of plates like this. But you can get both ends of this note if you get 2 different books. You can see that here, the lady holding the flag has a thumb and a hand. And if we go back and look at our counterfeit, what she has out there is a stump. So, as good as the engraving was on this note, somehow they overlooked this little section right here, and they overlooked the flourishes that should have been above and below with the. Now you can also, I don't remember if it's on this note. Yeah, it's on this one. This is that same 50. You can see that Justice is not blind here. This is supposed to be Justice. She's holding the scales of Justice someplace. No, I don't see the scale. She's holding, looks like she's holding 2 swords. but she's supposed to have a blindfold on, and although the blindfold, when it's in use, properly, really doesn't cover the eye sockets. The eyes are not open, whereas over here, the eyes seem to be wide open. This is my Lazy Deuce from Kinderhook, the only genuine Lazy Deuce I own. All right, so here this is the final exam. We've got two from Hampton National Bank of Westfield, Massachusetts. Which one's good and which one's bad? They both have Colby signatures. They both have the proper charter number. We got August 1st, 1865 there. August 1st, 1865 here. Looks like reasonably good engraving. The counterfeit detector says that the expression on Columbus's face in this vignette, where he's introducing America to the rest of the world, is different from on the genuine. Well, it's a little different. His eyes are more down here. Down here his eyes seem to be a little more open, but that's very subtle. The best way to separate this one is again by the numbers. 502273 on the genuine, 5505506. Oops. Well, okay. I don't have a picture of the listing for the Hampton, but the counterfeit does not have a proper number on it. Here's another example of the backs. You can see the expression on this guy's face is a little bit damaged by the wear on the note. But even on the genuine pieces up here, you can see that none of these faces look very realistic. Only Columbus's. Everybody else is sort of a caricature. That's the genuine piece. Okay, that concludes this portion of the talk. So what do we have in questions, Nathan?
Well, Joe, I think the one thing that was asked a couple different times, both by Alyssa and Steve, and I know that you mentioned the counterfeit detector, but any recommended books, websites, or sources to help guide the folks on this class?
I can't get my, I need to start video. I did start video. Yeah, my video is not coming up. Counterfeit detectors have the most useful information in them. Just on general principles, if you want to be able to distinguish good from bad notes of that period, I would say buy some cheap, genuine notes and carry them.
Yeah.
There are lots of big banks in New York that publish, that issue lots of notes, and they're not. They're not $50 notes. You have to spend a little bit more than that. But if you're going to collect this series, get a good 5 and a good 10. A good 20 is going to cost you more money, and forget about the 50s and 100s unless you got really deep pockets. But you can carry those genuine notes with you and then compare them with a note that you're wanting to buy. But as I say, I carry a counterfeit detector. That's and I've had many times with even people like Spink. I identified a $20 legal tender counterfeit in their stock one day. Well, they wouldn't believe it. I showed them that it was published. I showed it to them in the counterfeit detector. They still wouldn't believe it. and they did nothing about removing it from sale.
Wow.
But other dealers, when I've looked at a note and said, well, this one's bad, and I can show you why it's bad, and I pull out the detector and show them the published description, they'll change their label and change their price, and sometimes I buy the note and sometimes I don't, because I already have it, sometimes in multiple versions. But carrying a counterfeit detector is your easiest way of figuring out all of these 19th century pieces. Now, counterfeits continue to be made into the 20th century in nationals, not as many. And I've even got some a 1902 counterfeit on San Angelo, Texas. That's a very good counterfeit. And it's not described in these 19th century detectors, obviously, because it came later. So it's hard to find detectors for the early 20th century pieces because detectors that continued to publish deep into the 20th century stopped listing those just a few years after the conversion to small size notes. And they used a completely different method of listing the small size counterfeits, as I said, using plate number and position letter to go with the these were mostly Federal Reserve notes, so they also list the issuing bank.
So what I hear is, one, buy some genuine pieces, carry them around with you when you're going to shows if you're planning on purchasing stuff, and then the counterfeit detector. Those are the two kind of best ways to go about sourcing these.
That's my experience, yes.
Okay. Pat Weaver also asked, was the proper paper and ink readily available?
Well, the original series did not use paper with silk threads in them. Initially, it wasn't until maybe the 1870s, 80s that some of those notes started to show up with that kind of paper. I don't know the answer to that because I've never spent much time on the paper. Inks, there's plenty of sources for inks, and the only way that ink becomes an issue is if you these days, have one of those big $20,000 machines that analyzes the spectrum, that the ink emits under different kinds of illumination. That can be used for separating good from bad notes now, but nobody's got one of those things to carry around with them. Most of the grading companies don't have them either. PMG does. I don't know any other paper money grader that has that capability. But I would say that paper and inks were not an issue, and in the condition that these counterfeits degenerated into, it would be difficult to tell whether there were any silk threads in that paper anyway. Now, when you're talking about counterfeit silver certificates and others that had the horizontal thread through the note, where these days we have vertical threads in the note. Well, back in those days, they had a horizontal thread that went all the way across the note, which looks like a crease when you hold it up and look at it against the light. Those you could, you can separate good notes from bad notes by whether that thread is present or not. But the small colored silk threads just sort of disappear in badly worn notes.
Joe, I've got a couple additional questions. Some of them kind of seem similar, but I'll try and kind of wrap it into a 2-point question. But I was kind of wondering the same thing. It seems like collecting counterfeits is also kind of are people actually intentionally trying to purchase counterfeits? like you have done to you're doing it to teach classes and also to be able to identify between the genuines. But one, is that kind of a market, so to speak? And then two, is it legal? Like, are there, let's see how somebody, are there legal issues surrounding current ownership of these notes?
Well, there are. It depends on which lawyer you talk to. One lawyer will say it's not illegal to have them, it's only illegal to refuse to surrender them upon demand.
Interesting.
Another lawyer, or actually the Treasury himself, says they're still prosecutable even for simple possession. That hasn't been tested. But Secret Service is not chasing 19th century counterfeits.
Sure.
I've been told twice by the Secret Service to keep a lower profile. So, I take care to where some of this stuff gets published, especially some of the 20th century, material that I have. And I don't invite any agents in to admire my material. But yes, there are issues, and yes, there is a market. There are some major dealers who will not handle a counterfeit on general principles.
Sure.
They just won't list it. They do list counterfeits of obsoletes, but not of federal currency. But you can find these on eBay. eBay allows these listings to fly right through. They don't care. They're just looking for their bottom line.
Sure.
And these counterfeits show up on eBay regularly with substantial prices. And many of them don't get sold at those buy it now prices, but others that get put up for bid several $100.
I think we've pretty much addressed. Somebody had kind of mentioned or asked, and you kind of just addressed it with eBay. Are there any dealers or shops that specialize in carrying counterfeit notes that you know of, or that you would recommend?
Well, not that I know of, no.
Okay.
Okay, out of China, notes intended to deceive collectors. Here we have a Qing Dynasty 1850s note. These are on a sort of a flimsy paper, a rather soft, and it'll soak up a lot of water paper. What we have on here is seals representing the issuing authority, and another seal up here describing some of the conditions of circulation, and a seal over here, and an ink swipe, which act as counterfoils. Those go against a tab that's maintained when the note's issued and cut off of the tab, and when it comes back in for redemption, they match it up so that they can see that it was one that they actually issued. This is a 5,000 cash note, a fairly high denomination. Well, down here at the bottom, we've got what's supposed to be waves. This is waves in the ocean, and foam coming off the tops of the waves. In this case, at the bottom, both of these are pointing in the same direction. Over here, you've got two that are pointing against each other. That's a counterfeit. That's a replica. That's the first place to look at all of these chains. Look at these waves at the bottom and see if you've got clashing waves here. If you do, you don't have a good piece. And these come in many different denominations. Here's the back of the note. And here's a genuine. You can see that here we've got waves going in the same direction, and over here going in the same direction. And see this stain here? That has come through the paper from this seal on the back. And see these stains here? Those are coming through the paper from the seals on the face. These are 150-year-old notes. That ink that's used to impress those seals is a wax. It's not like stamp pad ink, which is very fluid. It's very waxy, very greasy, and over time it goes through the paper like that. So we go back to the modern replica. There's nothing like that. You have the very faintest hint of some vermilion showing through, but nothing at all like those stains that you see on a genuine piece. So even though it may not have clashing waves, because there are lots of counterfeits out there that don't have clashing waves, if it doesn't have those stains, those 150-year-old evidence of waxy ink on the back, then don't buy it. Now here we have a pair of specimens. Well, actually, the one on the right is a specimen. 0 serials, Mihon over here in Japanese. This is from the Bank of Taiwan when it was a Japanese possession at the beginning of the 20th century, in 1904, the date on these notes. This is intaglio, genuine. This is a lithographed fake specimen. Now, these have been in the market a long time. The first one of these I was offered was in 1974. And I got it and looked at it and contacted the dealer, called him up because there was no internet, there's no email, nothing like that 50 years ago, and said, A, it's not intaglio, B, it's not watermarked, it can't possibly be a specimen of one of these. It's got to be some sort of a, fantasy piece or a hell bank note. In my opinion, it probably was prepared as funerary money to be burned at a funeral to send with the deceased into the afterlife. And there's many versions of Chinese notes that are intended as hell bank notes. But these are still in the market. It's only been a couple of years ago that I saw another one of these offered, and I don't remember who had it and how it was being described, but it certainly was not being described as a fantasy or a replica. It was being described as a specimen. So watch for those. Here we have one that is a true fantasy. In World War II, when the Chinese had to evacuate Nanking and move over to Chongqing in the interior, the Japanese gathered up all of the circulating Chinese currency that they could find and substituted puppet bank notes, notes issued by Japanese-sponsored banks that had no international trade value, whereas the Chinese notes did have international trade value and the Japanese could spend them for armaments. So they were trying to sweep all of this stuff out of circulation. So the Chinese said, all right, we're going to overprint the notes, and if it's overprinted Chongqing, we'll honor it. If it's not overprinted Chongqing, we will not honor it. Well, they didn't do it with the 10 yuan notes. This is a 10 yuan note, and the value of a 10 yuan note was so low by the time they got around to this that they didn't bother to mark the tens. If they had done this legitimately, it would have also said Chongqing in black across here in Roman letters. So this note represents something that didn't exist at the time, that's being made these days just to sell to collectors. Here's one of those puppet banknotes that I was talking about. This is a 5,000 yuan note. It was the high denomination of this bank's issues. It's a several $100 note today. It's intaglio on watermarked paper with, well printed numbers, blocks and serials and seals. Here we have a replica of that with much less well printed numbers, not intaglio, either letterpress or litho, I can't remember which. You can see the difference in the quality of the engraving between the genuine piece here and the replica over here. It certainly looks like it's letterpress. These things also come with no block, only the brackets. Unfinished replicas where they forgot to put a numeral between those two brackets. I don't have one to show you, but I've seen them that way. So know what it is that you're trying to buy. Know that you're looking for an intaglio note with watermarks, and don't buy one which is not intaglio and doesn't have watermarks. You need to have a 20 power glass, 20 power magnification capability to easily separate intaglio from other forms of printing. Now here we have an original American banknote company, 2,000 yuan, actually 2,000 customs gold units note from 1947. Year 36 of the Chinese Republic was 1947. There were no 2,000 yuan notes in 1930, which is the date that's printed on this note, which is the date of the original series of customs gold units. But I believe the highest denomination in 1930 was 500. And here we've got a 2,000. And here we've got two different replicas of the 2,000 intended for sale to tourists. You know, these aren't available anymore in any kind of quantity. So they're reprinting these things. It's supposed to have a black, where it's actually dark blue, serial number. This one's got the serial in the wrong color. This one's got the serial in the wrong color. It's black instead of blue. Shanghai is supposed to be in the plate. This one, it's in the overprint. There's supposed to be planchettes in the paper. That's these paper discs that are embedded in the paper that are a security feature that you also find on military payment certificates. This one has no attempt at replicating the planchettes. And this one has planchettes that are printed on the surface of the paper. So every note out of a pack, and they do have running numbers, so there was a 607 and a 608 when these were printed. They're all going to have exactly the same planchettes from note to note, and that never happens in real life because the planchettes are randomly distributed in the paper slurry when it's made. So this one's intaglio, engraved. This one is letterpress, and this one is lithographed. Let's look at those at 20 power. Now here we have the backs, and you can see the 1947 here, and 1930 over here, which never happened. I haven't got the 20 power yet. We're looking at them under UV. Under ultraviolet, the original has no reactivity at all. The letterpress one has mild reactivity, and the lithographed one is very brilliant. If you were looking at these, not in the photograph, but in real life, this would be trying to blow you out of the room. That's because of the artificial brighteners which are put in modern day bond paper. Paper that you buy for your copying machine or for printing, off your computer printer. It all has artificial brighteners in it, and under ultraviolet, it really, pops out at you. Whereas genuine banknote paper does not have artificial brighteners and is very dull under UV. Here's the intaglio piece, and you can see the raised elements here of coming off the engraved plate. This is with side light so that you get shadows. I mean, these things are so high off the paper that you're getting shadows on the sides away from the light. The light's coming in here from the upper left and casting all these shadows. This is the letterpress piece. Now, letterpress, think rubber stamp. It's printed from raised type, and you get ink pushed out at the edges of long lines and in corners. That's a diagnostic of letterpress printing. There's a little bit of ink pushed out to the edges here, a little bit right there. It's not perfectly flat because the raised type embosses the paper through the paper to the back. And here's the lithographed one with an artificial planchette here. And you can see that there's even color out here in the margin where there should be no color at all, because many reproduction techniques don't like blank space. They put something out there that's not visible with naked eye, but to give it a little bit of texture or tone to the paper. Let me go back to the... All right, there's the planchette in the intaglio piece. And you can see this planchette even has silk threads in the paper disc. That's an unusual form of planchette, but they do exist. You get planchettes with silk threads in them. Some planchettes are UV reactive, especially the yellow ones. Yellow planchettes are generally invisible to the naked eye, unless you really look hard for them, but under UV they pop right out at you. Well, most planchettes are either blue or pink, and this one is blue. It's got mostly paper fiber over the top of it, but the threads in it have poked through the paper fibers. They're raised above the surface of the planchette. Chairman Mao is a very popular subject in China, and especially among tourists. Well, there aren't enough of these notes to go around, so this note has been replicated for sale to tourists. The original note is lithographed with letterpress, serials and overprints and seals. We're going to be looking at this area right down here and this leaf up here. Now, there's the replica. Let me see. Yeah, here we go. All right, you see these ragged edges? That's because when this lithographic plate was prepared, the original was lithographed, the replica is also lithographed, but the plate was prepared by shooting it through a screen, and that screen roughened up all of these edges. It gave you a pattern up in here. You can see here there's no pattern among those lines. And down here you do, and up on that leaf there's the original, and there's the screened replica. Anytime you see dots like this at magnification on a banknote, you're looking at a replica of some sort, either a digital replica or a screened lithograph replica. The number of legitimate banknotes that were printed using this kind of technology can be counted on one hand, other than the Khmer Rouge pieces. The Khmer Rouge pieces were printed using halftone technology. But other than that, it's very, very rare. Now here's two more examples of this counterfeit. Oh, and I forgot to mention back here, we had a 2-digit serial number. That's not damning because the note never used leading zeros. So you can get this with, let's use one. I've never seen a single-digit note. And of course, this is the replica we're looking at. But they were probably replicating a note that only had a 2-digit serial because leading zeros were omitted. Up here we had all 6 digits in use. So this pair, 835023, 835023, we've got the same serial number on them. Obviously they're not original. One of them has been canceled and torn up. The other one's torn up as well. I don't remember where these came from. I don't think these would have been tourist bait because they're so ugly, but they may have been circulating counterfeits in the period. All right, now we get to the People's Republic of China. These early People's Bank notes, dated 1948 and 49, are almost all lithographed on plain paper, which makes them very easy to replicate because there's no security features to speak of. A security feature is, does it have letterpress serial numbers? Because the only way you can get running serial numbers in this period is with a machine that prints one serial number at a time and advances. You know, it says 2 now, and it says 3 on the next sheet, and it says 4 on the next sheet. You can do that now using laser technology, but that didn't exist in 1949. Let's see what the date on this one. Yeah, this is a 49 note. This note happens to be on watermark paper. The replica is lithographed as well, just like this one is. This is lithographed all the way around except for the numerals and seals. Those are letterpress. This one is lithographed 100%. So there's the watermark. It's a wavy line, white parallel wavy lines. And there's the other note with light coming through it. No watermark visible at all, just plain white paper. On the seal, here's a letterpress diagnostic. The ink pushed out to the edges here. This is on the genuine piece. And the seal and the red plate are not the same shade. This is red, this is orange. In the slide, they might look, this looks redder than it really is. It's really more orange than that, but the reproduction isn't 100% accurate. But they're not the same. You can see that these are different shades. On the counterfeit, the shades are exactly the same. There's a darker red, more black in it, and they match. Now this pair, again, it's a lithographed note with letterpress seals and serials and specimen marking. This is a lithographed note. And all right, it's not a lithograph note. This is silkscreen note. Silkscreen is a very old printing technology, and it was used extensively in Indonesia right after World War II. There are lots of legitimate Indonesian provincial issues that were silkscreen, but it's more often used for fakes, both in Indonesia and in China. This is the first time I've ever seen it used for a whole note in China. Both the serials and the note are silkscreened. Now there's the letterpress specimen piece. You can see the ink pushed out to the edges here, all around these zeros. This looks like it has ink pushed out to the edges, but what you actually have is frothing created by the ink going through the silk and the silkscreen process turning into bubbles. And then the bubbles dry and they leave evidence of themselves at 20 power. Here we have the lithographed character Chung, meaning country, on the genuine note. And here we have the silkscreened one, and all of these white dots here are places where the ink frothed as it went through the silk and made bubbles, and then those bubbles dried and left this evidence. It's much more evident in this character than it is on the serial numbers. It's up on the surface of the paper like intaglio is. It's not as high as intaglio, but it's certainly much more prominent than lithograph, especially offset lithography. All right, this genuine note is letterpress. The Chinese didn't use lithography for all of their notes. They had multiple printing plants, and that's why we have so many different notes from China during this period, because every plant seemed to have its own set of plates and its own sources of artwork. Now, this one is a letterpressed original, and this one is a modern laser copy of that. There's the letterpress original, even more prominent ink out at the edges. And there's the laser, which looks like it's screened because some laser copiers use a screening process to determine where to put the different colors. And you've got black, black laid on top of red here to make the brown. When you put this under ultraviolet, it turns purple, whereas this one back here under ultraviolet stays brown. And there's not 20 power under UV, but ordinary under UV. The original is unreactive, and the modern is brilliant. The paper is very bright. Here we have one which on the original is intaglio. This is a 50 yuan note. Now 50 yuan these days is almost nothing, and by the time this series ended, 50 yuan was again nothing, because they were doing 10,000 and 50,000 yuan notes before this series ended. But at this time, in 49, this was an intaglio note, and it's also a specimen. And this is a modern lithographed reproduction. Now there's the intaglio. It's a shallow intaglio. It's not very deep, not very high quality, but it does stand up off the surface of the paper. There's the lithograph, and it's sort of hard to distinguish these with the lighting that you get with a USB microscope, because it's 360-degree lighting. I tried to illuminate this from one side. You can see it's brighter over here than it is over here, but it's such a shallow intaglio that it really doesn't stand up enough to show the intaglio texture, which you saw on that American banknote company, the orange piece, a little while ago. Now here's the serial number on the good piece, letterpress, with the ink pushed out to the edges. And there's the serial number on the counterfeit, which is also letterpress. So they lasered the design, but they letterpressed the serials and seals. Now here's one that's all litho on this, no letterpress, except the numbers and seals. Those are letterpress. We're going to be looking at the second driver back here, the second muleteer. Back here. There's the genuine piece. You can see that there's a pretty good distinction in lines. On the counterfeit piece, it's much more clouded up. They're much more overlapping each other, not as well separated, especially over in here. This is impossible to see with the naked eye. You've got to have magnification to be able to see this, and you have to know where to look. Now there's the serial number on the genuine letterpress. Here's the serial number on the fake, which is lithographed, along with all the rest of the note. And the numerals are not even nice. They're very irregular. That's the block characters on the genuine, and there's the block characters on the counterfeit, and the block characters are not lithographed, they're letterpress. Now this is really dumb, because you want to have the serial number be advancing, which you need letterpress to do. You can sometimes find block characters like this, which only change every many thousands of notes, in the plate, and they'll put up another plate for the next block. But it's it's completely a non sequitur to have a block character in letterpress and to have the serial numbers in litho. Here we have another piece. The original is intaglio. This is a 200 yuan note, and the replica is lithographed. A little bit better intaglio on this one. You can see the ink standing up off the surface of the paper a little bit better there. There's the flat lithograph replica. There's the letterpress serial number. And that was the letterpress serial number on the counterfeit. So when you have an original, which is litho with letterpress, and a replica, which is litho with letterpress, then you have to look at the UV reactivity, the font that was used for the serial number, really off-the-wall kinds of things that are very difficult to do in hand at a show. In this case, we had the advantage that the genuine was intaglio, and you might be able to figure that out with a 5 or 6 power hand loop, but 20 power is really your best solution. Now here we've got one of the pieces for either Mongolia or Xinjiang. I can't remember which back this has. Back in the 1951 period, the Chinese were issuing notes specifically for use in Xinjiang and Mongolia in high denominations. By this time, the inflation had run away from them, and these were 5 and 10,000. They start with 500, 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000 yuan notes. These are very expensive notes in today's market. This note in this grade would be over $100,000. Here's one that showed up on eBay. And I said to myself, well, I collect counterfeits anyway, so it doesn't matter to me if that's a good note or a bad note. And if it is a good note, it'd be nice to have an example of a genuine piece to compare with the laser copy I already had. This is a modern laser copy. Well, it turns out this one's also Xerox. It's not laser, it's a Xerox copy, and intentionally distressed to make it look like it's been through the wars. It's been circulated hand to hand back in the hinterland, and make it a little more likely to be able to sell. You couldn't sell one of these things on eBay with a start price of $4 because everyone knows that they're worth more than that. But you might sell this one with a start price of $4. I don't remember what I paid for that, a little bit more. There's the laser copy, and you can see the screening that this laser printer is using, the screening technique that it's using to create its colors. And you've got screening in the letters here. You've got red on this side and yellow on this side and orange in the middle. It's supposed to be a true overlap, but this is not a well-calibrated laser copier. So its red and its yellow are not going on directly on top of each other the way they're supposed to. So you get at 20 power, you can see the yellow on one side and the red on the other side, and orange only where they're overlapping. There's what the camel looks like on the laser copy. Now there's the character Guo on the Xerox copy. And you can see that there's stray colors down in here escaping where they're not supposed to be. and black very heavily deposited on the paper, and then the distressing part cracked all those black elements. What is laser? What is Xerox? It's plastic on paper. It starts out with a finely divided plastic powder, a floury plastic powder, which adheres to the paper electrostatically where the design is going to be, and then goes through a fuser and melts and then hardens on the surface of the paper. When you circulate it, when you damage it, it breaks because it's hard plastic and pieces fall off. You can see all the blue over here. This is not a well-calibrated copier either. Here's a genuine note of that piece. This was Ruth Hill's note, which was in my possession for a week during the authentication period before her collection was sold. I unfortunately did not take 20 power photographs of, for instance, the camel's head, but you can see it doesn't look quite the same as the camel's head that we saw a moment ago. I did take 20 power photos of the seals because there are secret marks in the seals that the original replicators of these didn't identify. We'll look at that when we get to this note here. Here we've got the same kind of deal, a distressed Xerox copy and a modern laser copy. There's the modern piece at 20 power. There's the horse on the clean piece. There's the horse on the Xerox piece. Now here's a specimen of this on old paper that has no UV reactivity, does not have a screened horse, has a lithographed horse with proper delineation. There's the back of it with the specimen markings and the blue tint in the background here and the red-brown main plate. And this is the Mongolian version, and that's the Mongol language there. And here's Ruth Hill's piece that she bought decades ago. All right, we're going to look at the seals down here. There's the seal on the copy. It's letterpress properly, the way it's supposed to be. And notice the format of this portion of the seal. In the counterfeit, they left this corner open. I'm sorry, in the genuine piece, they left that corner open. That's a secret mark in the seal. This was not initially picked up by the people who made this counterfeit here. Now, the counterfeits that are now being made have learned these things. They've picked up on these. Not from anything I published, but they found genuine notes that they can make copies of, and they're using those as their models. Here's the seal on the other end of the note, the right-hand seal. There's the counterfeit, closed right here on this corner. And there's the genuine, which is open on that corner and also open right here. Now this does occur on legitimate seals on some notes, just not on this particular note. On the back, this tint, let me see if I've got close-ups of that. No. You can see that the tint is sort of an irregular mesh pattern, and it's got points pointing down on this side and points pointing down on this side. That's the counterfeit. On the genuine, The points point down on the left end, but they point up on the right end. And that occurs on both the top quadrant and the bottom quadrant down in here. So you've got down on this end and down on this end on the counterfeit. The counterfeit was the specimen, and on the genuine one, they point up on the right end and down on the left end. Those have also now been fixed by the more modern replicas. All right, these notes. We're now up to 1953. Revalued currency. All those thousands of yuan had 3 zeros chopped off of them, and what used to be 50,000 is now 50. Maybe even less. This note started out with 3 Roman numeral blocks and 7 Arabic digits. It soon became, inflation continued to go on, and this 1 fen note, 1 cent, 1/10 or 1/100th of a yuan, it was no longer practical to print running numbers on them. So they chopped off the numerals and just used the blocks. Well, this note here was one of those ones that had only blocks. And somebody has added the zeros to try to make it a specimen of this note up here, neglecting the fact that true specimens, which do exist, had the zeros following the block, not preceding the block. But they've added the zeros here, and they've added the specimen markings, and are selling this note as a specimen. Now here we've got the 5 fen in the same series. Started out with 3 Romans and 7 Arabics, and then went to 3 Romans. Well, these now are $100, $150, $200 notes, depending on the condition, that have the full number. These are $1 a pack. I mean, maybe probably $5 a pack, but they're 5-cent notes. You can throw away a lot of these to try to create one of these, and that's what the counterfeiters have now done. There's the original, and here's the modern production. By scraping off or cutting off the 3 Roman numerals that were here by themselves, replacing the paper with paper from another note, from some place, cut from another note, again skinned so it's only half thickness, and then glued into place on the receiving note, leaving it completely blank, and then printing fresh a full number like this. So here we've got, you can see this this line coming up here, this pyramid. See how these lines are separated here? That's where a piece of paper has been added in off of another note. You can throw away a lot of notes cutting these papers off, splitting them in half, and then gluing them into place on a note that you removed the Roman numerals from. So there we've got one location, another location, the same thing. See this diagonal line going up here? And a third location where the 3 Roman numerals were removed before the new thing was printed. And when you look at it against the light, you don't see any dark and light areas here where paper has been added or removed. They're very, very skillful at shaving out half of the paper they're removing and putting in only half of the thickness of the paper they're replacing, so you don't get anything to show against the light that shows that paper has been added or removed to this note. All you have is these borders where you can see this upside down wedge here. And this looks like a rectangle down here, parallel sides. This is very skillful work. And it takes a 5-cent note and turns it into a $150 note, which is a really good return, especially if your labor costs are very low, like slave labor in China. Well, fortunately, the grading companies have figured this out. The Chicago dealer handed me this note in a body bag from PMG. Said, "How come they didn't grade this for me?" And I pointed out to him why they didn't grade it for him. And he handed it to me and says, "Put it in your collection." So now you've got it to look at here. I was wanting one of these, and the problem with these things is that when the grading companies send them back, they don't get put on the market as replicas. They either get sold on the QT on the side without a slab, or they get trashed. Now here's a 10 yuan note in that same series. This was the high denomination in the series. It's a multi-$1,000 note now as well. This one's in rather sad condition. It could be worse. It's intaglio, facing back, with letterpress seals and serials, and a watermark of the coat of arms of China up here in the watermark window. There's the original. There's one lithographed replica. There's another lithographed replica. Now, what do they do about the numbers from the watermark? Well, the numbers, they reproduce. Didn't do a very good job with this one. It's under inked, but they're letterpress on the paper. Now, there's the original watermark, the genuine watermark, shown with light shining through the paper. There's the first lithograph note watermark. There's the second lithograph note watermark. This is what they look like under ultraviolet. No reaction whatsoever with the genuine piece. The first one looks like that. The second one looks like that. It's printed on the surface of the paper in a transparent ink, which you can't see with the naked eye, but under UV pops right up at you. Now, there are other ways to fake watermarks. These fake notes could be laminated, and you could have the face and the back both printed on very thin pieces of paper, and then you insert a fake watermark between the two laminated pieces. I don't have one of those, but I've got other Chinese pieces with laminated watermarks. So you can't always find the watermark with UV, but if you do find it with UV, you know you've got a bad piece. Plus the fact that these notes are lithographed rather than being intaglio. So if you've got the right magnification and you know what you're looking at, you can separate these two lithograph pieces from this intaglio piece here. Now this note has also been counterfeited in intaglio. It's the first intaglio counterfeit I've seen come out of China. I don't have pictures of it in this slide set, but it does exist. So be aware of that as well. Your best bet on all of this kind of stuff is get a grading company to grade it. Okay, here we've got the 10-cent note, 1 jiao, which is 1/10 of a yuan. There's about 7 or 8 varieties of this. You got 3 Roman characters, you got 2 Roman characters, you got blue numerals and Romans instead of red Romans and numerals. You got with watermark, you got without watermark, and you got 2 different backs. You've got a back with green in it and a back with no green in it. The green back with watermark, with red serials, with 3 Roman numerals is a multi-$100 note. It's the only one of the 7 or 8 varieties of this note which is really significant. So it's the one that everybody wants to find or create. And in this case, we've got one that was created. The one above here is created from one of these. Here are the watermarks. They're a 5-pointed star with an open center. You can see a star there. You can see a star down here. There's a star up here behind the coat of arms. And down here, there's a star over here in this margin. There's a piece of a star right here, piece of a star right here. So this is a note that they would take and put the green back on to make it into the highly desirable greenback watermarked note. This is a genuine greenback note. This is my replica of the greenback note. It's actually a doctored note. Now there's a tint on the back here. You see these characters here start out in green, become brown, and become green again. And that's what we're looking at here, is on the genuine piece, it starts green on one end, merges into brown, stays brown, and then merges back into green. On my doctored piece, the green has been printed on over the brown. The brownback note does not have that progressive tint. It's brown all the way across. So they've taken this brownback note and printed the green right over the characters. And here it tapers out. It slowly changes to brown with the same kind of texture and continues on that way until you get to the end and it turns to green again. Here's the place where the floral ornament is in transition. That green to brown transitional lithograph plate starts green on one end of the note and turns to brown. And in my doctored piece, again, starts green here, turns to brown, and it tapers out here to give the impression of this gradual change in the progressive tint, whereas this is a doctored tint. Now this piece down here, the genuine piece, started out life as narrowed. Instead of changing color vertically the way it does on this end it changed color diagonally. It was the green faded out down here before it was supposed to. Well, somebody has gone on to this genuine note, a very high value note, and doctored it to restore the brown where it should have been. Instead of leaving it alone as a perfectly nice error note, they painted green over the brown. So this was sold by a major auction house whose name starts with S and ends with K, and I complained about the fact that they did not describe it as a doctored note. And they said, oh, well, let's send it back. And I said, not on your life. I'm just going to keep it and put your name on the holder so everybody knows where it came from. At any rate, now I do have a genuine piece of my doctored piece. Now, here's the 50 yuan note in that early 50s series, a high denomination at the time. It's originally dated 1980. 1980 note is very valuable now. It only takes a little change right here, just changing one numeral from 9 to 8 to turn this into a 1980 note. Now the 1990 note has a metallic thread in the paper down here. But you can open this paper up and jerk that thread out of there. And then it's almost impossible to tell that it's been doctored. You can't see it with light shining through it. You have to look at it and see where the surface of the paper used to have a bump in it where that thread was and now no longer does. So you change that one numeral and pull the thread out and you've got a very high value 1980 note. Except that in 1990 they have ultraviolet lettering on it. It says 50 here in Chinese and 50 here in numerals. And in 1980, they did not have that. And the counterfeiters these days have not addressed the presence of this UV feature on their doctored 1990 to 1980 notes. So if you're offered a 1980 note, stick it under UV. If it shows like this, send it back. Here we have specimens. Very cheap. Notice this is the ethnic series, showing all the series of different races and cultures throughout China that have had 0 serials added. All these specimen markings are added. This is all silk screened on top of notes which originally had legitimate numerals, a regular serial number and no specimen markings. I've got a full set of these. Now some of them, half of them, have letterpress specimen serial numbers on them. They're all in set number 342. There's what a genuine specimen overprint is supposed to look like in letterpress. Ink pushed up at the edges, all the way across here, and dropouts like here. That's your hazard with letterpress, is if you don't hit it hard enough, you get dropouts. If you hit it too hard, you get smearing and very deep halos. There's again a letterpress specimen marking. Not on one of these notes, it's on a different note. All right, this is the silkscreen specimen marking. You see it's not smooth along the edges. It's not distinct along the edges. It's very fuzzy along the edges. And it's got this funny texture to it. You'll see an even more extreme example of that in a moment. There's the silkscreen character on the back, just ugly as the dickens. Very blurry. Here's what they did with the serial numbers. They scraped them off. They scraped off the original serials and put on these letterpress zeros, these silkscreen zeros in place of the letters that used to be there. Well, there's your letterpress specimen serial. Here's another pair of notes from the same series, and they've got silkscreen specimen serials. And look at this texture here. That's the texture of the fabric through which the ink was pushed when that silkscreen overprint was added to that note. And there's the silkscreen specimen serial. Another 342. On this piece, you had a progressive tint down here that was changing from violet, from blue violet to pale violet. And where they damaged it here, they replaced it with all blue all the way across here. This should have been a progressive change in the color of that tint. But where it was damaged when they removed the original serial number, they just used blue all the way across. Here's another location where they touched up. They re-inked the ink that had been removed when they took off the original serials. There's the letterpress number. Now look at the dates on these. 1980, 1996, 1980, 1990. They expect us to believe that they printed specimens in 1980 with this serial and kept them for 16 years to add to the set in 1996? How dumb do they think collectors are? That's what they're selling. Here's a pair. This is genuine on top. This is a modern replica for circulation on the bottom. This wasn't done for collectors. This was done for circulation. And there's a serial number that was on it, that they had on it. That got published. And after that got published, they said, well, we can't use those numbers anymore because everybody knows them. So let's just pull those off and put on new numbers. And you can see underneath here, RC 585, etc. Down here, the only last 3 digits are different. The last 3 digits are not underneath, are not the same as the first ones up here. So this was done by a counterfeiting crew that wanted to circulate these further. And here we have a fantasy from the 1920s that I had owned for a long time, and this showed up on eBay, all beat up like this, and I said, well, maybe it wasn't a fantasy after all. I mean, look at the way this thing circulated. So I bought this, and that was back in the days when eBay still let you see who your competition was, and the fellow in Germany who was bidding against me emailed me and said, okay, you bought the note I wanted, could you at least send me a picture of it, please? So I did that, and then I asked him, because he's a specialist in Chinese notes, are they really fantasies? He says, yes, indeed, they really are fantasies. Those notes never existed. So this is the length that somebody went to make this note look legitimate. You can see it's got the same font, AB 186 there, AB 183 down here. It's somewhat different paper, but it's the same source. And they distressed this one to make it look saleable. Okay, we've run a little bit over time. I think that's my last slide. Yes, it is. So are there any questions?
There are, Joe. If you don't mind, I want to ask you something. There was, and this could be in reference to the first half of the class or even the latter half, but your very first slide, I'm pretty sure it was, you had referenced how the 2 waves were in one direction on the right-hand bottom side, and then the 2 waves were facing each other on the left.
Right.
Was that just sloppy work, or it almost seems like it's intentionally done to kind of leave a signature, so to speak? Like, why would they not make it identical?
Well, that's exactly true. Counterfeiters usually sign their work.
Okay.
So that they can tell their notes from somebody else's notes.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. We do have a couple. Steve, let's see here. James Haney, a little while ago, had asked, what is letterpress? But I think he asked that right before you did end up addressing that question.
Okay, well, for starters, go back and watch my first e-learning presentation on printing technologies and introduction to counterfeit detection, and it addresses all these printing technologies in detail.
Okay.
So go on the ANA website under seminars, and then look for recorded seminars.
Okay.
And then I'm in the very first group. They've got them separated by quarters and halves of year now.
Okay.
So go down to the first group until you find my talk, and then watch that one. So that's a 2-hour-long session on printing technology.
Okay. Steve Davis, or Sean, excuse me, Davis had asked, replica versus counterfeit, is there a difference? Steve had responded to it in the chat bar, so I don't know if you've seen that. Replicas, copies are legal to make in China, provided they are represented as such, but of course not needing to be marked as is required in the US. Is Chinese law the same? So I guess the question is replica versus counterfeit. I'm not sure if that was addressed earlier.
Well, all these notes that have been demonetized are not controlled at all. There's no law regarding, there's nothing like the Hobby Protection Act. So any note that's been demonetized can be copied at will. And these early 1948 and 49 Chinese notes were replicated immediately as soon as they were demonetized for sale to tourists. So people now are saying, well, my dad got these in Hong Kong when he was out there in 1964, and I point out to them, I've got the same serial number in my collection, or I've got one that's only 3 numbers away in my collection. They were being replicated 40 years ago, well,
Sure.
60 years ago already.
Okay.
So a counterfeit is intended to circulate. A
Gotcha.
replica is something that's made after the fact, not to circulate, but it could be for sale to collectors. So, as far as we're concerned, it's a counterfeit because it's not a genuine or original piece.
Sure.
But it never was made in the period to circulate at the time.
That makes sense. Someone had asked, are some of the techniques that you had mentioned also used to counterfeit U.S. currency?
Absolutely. U.S. counterfeits come in all shapes and sizes. You got digital copies. If you go back into the 40s and 50s, you got letterpress copies. The stuff that's coming out of Peru now is all lithographed, but it's got all the security features in it. They put the threads in, they do everything else they need to do, but they're not using intaglio presses. And then you've got what are called the super notes, which do use intaglio presses, printed on the same paper using the same OVI inks that we have. All kinds of every kind of gang that you can think of has different access to technology, and they'll use whatever they have.
Wow. I believe we've addressed all of the questions. If anybody had a question that I did not relay over to Joe, please go ahead and state it now. And otherwise, we'll probably go ahead and wrap this up just to be respectful of everyone's time and to let Joe get back to the grandkids. I don't know if they're still there. It's late. We're in your neck of the woods, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they just got here today for a week. So.
Oh, gotcha. You got plenty of time.
Yep.
Well, I think, I'm not seeing anything else roll in here, Joe. I say we'll go ahead and, there's just a bunch of thanks from everyone that was attending the class. At this point, let's go ahead and kind of close this session. Thank you, Joe. This was a wonderful and educational presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it and learned as much as I did. Again, we want to thank Graysheet for their partnership with the A&A eLearning Academy, and we hope you'll join us for future webinars. Everybody have a great evening.